In today's video, a desperate cry for insight from an dude just like you, only named Richard, sitting in a front row seat at the Bogan Banjo Philharmonic, which we also know as the Gibb River Road in the Kimberley, Western Australia. Problematically, the engine in Richard's fine Y62 Patrol appears to be showing signs that it might be entertaining the concept of defecating explosively in its DAX any day now. We will get into Richard's impending potential cleanup in aisle 2 patrol problem in just a sec, but before we do, these videos are made possible because of my 2 retirement-preventing side hustles, which would be getting punters just like you a new car cheap. If you want a Bentley or an S-Class or something of that nature, I am absolutely not interested in helping you, but if you want a mainstream vehicle like, I don't know, Mazda CX-5 or a CX-3 or a Kia Sportage or Sorento, Hyundai Tucson, Santa Fe, something of that nature, or a car. We still do them, even though car sales are off a cliff. I've got a whole team of car buyers ready to talk to you and then go out into dealershipville and do battle with various fleet sales managers so that we get a fleet-style discount for you, even though if you front up face-to-face on the killing floor at a dealership, you will not be eligible for that kind of discount and you'll have to pedal really hard to get one. So we sort of make that easy and stress-free, and we don't charge you a fee. If you go ahead with the purchase, we actually charge the dealer a fee for finding the sale for them. So there's that. My second side hustle is rooftop solar, which is unbelievably good value right now with the federal government's new battery bonus incentive thingo, which will basically kick you back several $1,000 if you buy a battery. So now the time has never been better to upgrade an existing system with a battery or to just get a battery and rooftop solar as a package deal, because you will get thousands of dollars that you would not have got at this time last year or just a few months ago, and that'll be your tax dollars at work, dudes, so they're going to throw it at you, might as well catch. I've also got a really good team there that can put together a solid system that will be reliable, no cowboy installers, and local support with quality components. Just go to my website, autoexpert.com.au, and click on either the Save Thousands link for a car or the solar link for, if you can't join those dots, I probably don't want to help you either. But for everyone else whose IQ is beyond the room temperature in degrees C in the middle of winter, happy to help, dude. Let us talk vicariously to Richard now, and if you come up with a brilliant suggestion that I fail to deliver here because of my own inner idiot, feel free to chime in the comments below, because many hands make light of work and might even prevent that in-DAC explosion that none of us want to experience in the Kimberley. Hell of a long tow home, isn't it? Anyway, Richard goes, I have a 2022 Nissan Patrol Y62, which I bought new, he's saying, through us, which means he saved thousands, and you can too, dude, at the risk of being shamelessly self-promoting. Richard says, I had its 30k service done by a local mechanic, not by Nissan, because those idiots got an apprentice to do it last time and he lifted it until the roof hit the top of the hoist. 2 things on that. 1, the best 2-post hoists at least have an optional micro switch bar proximity jigger on the bar that spans the 2 posts, which essentially shuts the hoist down before it can be a roof press brake for your vehicle, because nobody wants that. And 2, I can see it now, the bone through the nose. We're playing Snoop and Deep Thrash with the volume on 15. It's almost as if we hate our jobs and we don't want to concentrate on them, isn't it? That would make it hard for me to concentrate, the bone through the nose in particular. Anyway, Richard says 5,000 kilometres on, And I could see why he boned the local dealer. That would do it for me also, incidentally. 5,000 kilometres on, it has developed a noticeable occasional engine rattle, especially on cold start. I'd suggest that could be anything, dude, even confirmation bias. It might have been there from new, and you might just be imagining it now. Who knows? Richard says, I suspect cheap oil, and here's why. After the service, I had concerns as I checked the sump plug and found that it was still covered in dust, suggesting it wasn't removed and the engine oil was sucked out, not proper or complete servicing. I then found the air filter wasn't genuine. Wesfill, I think. A couple of points on that too. A non-genuine filter here and there, quite okay. Non-genuine filters, as long as they're quality ones and not double happiness air sucker or something from China. Quite okay, right? Some brand that we know which mechanics use all over town, just fine. And in some cases, if you buy the quality one, like the premium non-genuine filter, will probably be better than the genuine filter because manufacturers just make their filters for their target service life of the engine. And in the case of air filtration, what you want to do is suck the least amount of abrasive dust in, and it's potentially possible to do a better job than that. Same thing with oil filters. So don't stress about non-genuine, just stress about it if it is the double happiness jigger, because all bets are off if you've got the cheapest Chinese filter that one can buy. No proof that suction was used either, I'd suggest, but a strong suspicion. So we haven't proved that suction was used, but just let's say suction was used. And if you're not familiar with this, what these churn type servicing operations do is instead of removing the sump plug and letting the oil drain out and then decanting it into some waste oil container, what they do is they remove the dipstick and then they put a catheter down there and they jam it right down what they hope is the bottom of the sump, and then they suck like it's 1959. And they just decant it automatically like that. And that's quicker. And when time is money, that's an easier, cheaper way to do the job. So if you're a churn and burn servicing operation, you probably suck the oil out. Most people probably don't give a crap. But Nissan does not recommend suction for changing the oil for a couple of reasons, because the 5.6 litre V8 in the Y62 has a wide and deep sump, and it's got a convoluted series of baffles in it as well. And the best information I could dig up on this was that if you use suction, 200 to 300 mils of material might remain in the sump, which of oil might remain in the sump, which sounds terrible, but it's really only, I worked it out, it's only like 2 to 4% of the total sump capacity of 7.9 litres. So it's got a lot of oil down there, and if 200 to 300 mils remains in there, then, you know, not ideal, but not a freaking disaster either. So it would have been nice, I think, to hear from Richard about whether or not he noticed if the oil filter had been changed, because there's no point in changing the oil without also changing the filter. You're probably putting, I don't know, 400 or more millilitres of previously, or leaving 400 millilitres of previously used oil there as well if you do that. So I would have loved to know that, but he didn't include that in his missive. So let us move on. I'd suggest that there's also no straight line, meaning no absolute proof between suction here and engine rattle here. This is not a logical cascade, you know, beyond reasonable doubt or something in frickin' court. There's also no straight line between the service and the rattle, because there's 5,000 operational kilometres in the intervening time. So the rattle could be due to anything. And I think joining these dots is an example perhaps of confirmation bias, because it's nice to assemble the world into a framework that fits neatly, but that's not always the way things work. So you have to bear that in mind as well. like nothing untoward seemed to happen for 5,000 kilometres, and then all of a sudden she's rattling, on startup. And this is an engine, let's not forget, that's only done 35,000 Ks. So that's the evidence we've got. We've got the rattle, and we've got this suspicion that suction was used, and no proof, and we don't know anything about the filter, but we know that 5,000 kilometres was in the middle. So, and it's a baby engine. It's only done 35,000 Ks. So suction does not also definitively prove cheap oil, although I wouldn't be so concerned about cheap oil as I would about oil that's not on spec, because the spec of the oil, like the specification of that oil, is really important in model engines and also modern engines, which is what I meant to say before I had a brain aneurysm and sniffed too much fucking glue this morning. So suction doesn't confirm cheap oil, but I'd suggest that there's a probability that we might have used any convenient oil, because shops that use suction do servicing quickly and cheaply, and they obviously will use the cheapest inputs they can, so the cheapest filters, the cheapest oil. As long as it's on spec, though, it shouldn't really matter. The cheapness of the oil they use is if it's on spec, is most likely to derive from having some preferred supplier. They get a volume deal with a preferred supplier. If they do that, lock themselves in, they'll probably get a discount, particularly if they're buying a shit ton of oil from the one supplier. So there's that. Now, I checked, and the correct spec for the Y62 appears to be 5W30 full synthetic, graded API SN for November. API is just American Petroleum Institute. That's the body that does these particular standards, and SN was a standard that came in 2010. So you can use SN or newer, and that means alphanumerically newer. And I can only dig up two specs that were newer, which is SN Plus or SP. SN Plus came in 2018. SP came in 2020, but the base SN, which is the minimum compliance level, that's a product of 2010 introduction. So any of those, SN, SN Plus or SP would be fine, but do not use SM for Michael, because it's a prior grade and not up to spec. And it's so important to use the right spec in a modern engine, because tolerance is so fine and servicing intervals are so long, and the oil has a particular job to do, and all the propeller heads with their PhDs in R&D specify a particular oil for a particular reason, okay? Anyway, with that in mind, Richard goes on and says that this eroded my confidence in the mechanic. The fact that the sump plug appears to be untouched, etc., a non-genuine filter. Okay, I get that. Confidence in mechanics is a thing, and if they do something to undermine that, then you're probably going to go somewhere else next time, aren't you? And decent mechanics are in the business of giving it to you straight, but they're also in the business of trying to save you, the customer, money, which is substantially different to how a dealership operates. Like when you go into a dealership, in this case a Nissan dealership, they just look at you like a predator looking at the prey. It's an ambush, and you're standing on the X, and they're trying to figure out how much they can suck out of you before there's any significant pushback. And I suggest they do it on the cheap too. They don't often use the best mechanics or the most highly trained mechanics. You've usually got one really decent servicing pro in a dealership and a whole bunch of labourers doing the rest, kind of the glorified labourers or apprentices, whatever. Richard says, I'm now towing my caravan, cue the banjo. This makes me feel like I'm in the Kimberley, on my way to Dingo Piss Creek, as you say. Yes, I do say that from time to time. He's a regular then. Daytime temperatures around 31 to 34 degrees Celsius. I'd suggest that 34 degrees C ambient temperature is not a harsh operating environment in the context of using a vehicle like a Patrol. It should be capable of doing that all frickin' day long as the radiator's not full of mud and it's properly maintained, etc. 34C all day, every day should be a walk in the park for I don't know, 200, 250,000 Ks, something like that. Richard says, occasional engine rattling caused me to occasionally check oil levels, which are fine. And here's where Richo and I are going to have a bit of a difference of opinion, okay? Because I'd say that out there, or just on long trips generally, you should be checking the vital fluids every day, right? If you know what's good for you, because much better to see the oil down this much than for you to discover it when a conrod goes through the side of the cylinder block kind of thing. Because that's what we're trying to prevent here by just doing the basic checks of, in particular, coolant and oil, right? Every morning. Just check that. And the tyre pressures. That's 3 things. Not too hard, right? Let's try and be responsible grown-ups about this, shall we? Richard goes, but I'm currently on the Gibb River Road, a long way from a dealership, and the rattle was worse this morning, or your confirmation bias was worse. Shut it off and restart and it went away, although it does seem a bit noisier than normal, or maybe I'm hyper-tuned to it. Yeah, dude, maybe you are just hyper-tuned. Maybe you are just making this shit up in your own head because it fits. Seems to fit. It's convenient, isn't it? Confirmation bias is a thing, right? It's a real problem in science because they run experiments and the researchers often really want a particular result because they've invested significant time and effort and resources into their particular hypothesis and they want to prove it, and they go looking for evidence that proves it, although that's not how science is supposed to work. And out here in non-science land, what happens is those woke Nazi psychologists at Google and places like that, they go off looking for ways to weaponize all of our confirmation bias. Like your confirmation bias is being weaponized by them every day. Like you look at your feed and you go in and you watch one video and it might be a bad roadside interaction with a police officer and a member of the public, okay? And you think, that was fun? I'll go and watch that. And before you know it, you've wasted 6 hours of your life watching bad interactions between members of the public and asshole police officers, and then you start forming this view that every interaction is like that and all cops are assholes, and the evidence in front of you seems to support that, but it's really just those woke Nazis weaponizing your confirmation bias, because not all cops are like that, and if you're the victim of a crime, then they are actually quite sympathetic and they mostly try and find the bad guy, and they love sticking the bracelets on him and throwing him away to the extent that they get to do that. So it's easy to have your confirmation bias weaponized. This problem is getting worse in our society, and that means our predisposition to doing it ourselves in daily life is worse. And so it may just be that Richard pressed the auto down button on the window and heard his engine start up with the noise coming in from outside for the very first time in a few days, and he noticed the rattle, even though the car might have been doing that for its entire life. Who knows? I'm just saying you got to be careful about confirmation bias because it's a thing, dude. Anyway, Richard says, I called a mechanic who tried telling me this model has substantial timing chain failures with many cars undergoing warranty repairs. And I'd suggested I don't think the mechanic tried telling you that. I think he did tell you that, Richard. So maybe that's just him trying to weasel out of any accountability. Who knows? Richard says, seemed like a total load of bullshit to me, as I found nothing online about this. So I went online, had a little bit of a look around about timing chain reliability in the Y62, and I've concluded that the Y62 is pretty durable on the timing chain front, but there are known issues with the tensioners and or guides for that timing chain. Stretch can be a problem at 200,000 kilometres plus, like every other freaking engine on Earth. But not baby engines. Not baby engines like 35,000 kilometres. It's not a thing, okay? Rattling on cold start in a Y62 could be timing chain where Or I found that it could be a VVT solenoid issue as well, especially if the engine throws a P0011 or P0021 fault code. So if the check engine light comes on and you plug it in and either of those two codes, the 0021 or 0011 code, come up, then that is a bit of a red flag for a variable valve timing solenoid issue. But this is extremely rare for engines under 120,000 Ks, more likely to occur at double that, okay? So we're only at 35,000, and even if there's cheap oil here or it's not on spec, the engine's only done 5,000 Ks with this oil in it, which is unlikely to start destroying itself, I'd suggest. So Richard concludes with, have I got any suggestions or advice, right? Bin cam. I don't know. People keep asking me about bin cam, but I'm not motivated to set one up. Let me know in the comments. So if the mechanic is especially useless, that Y62 might have the wrong oil in it, which is potentially a disaster long term, but unlikely to cause catastrophic engine failure, I'd argue, in the short term, especially because we're not racing, we're just driving at highway speeds, which is notoriously easy on things like engine oil. Doesn't get very contaminated, doesn't have a very big job to do, it's not revving really high or producing big power outputs, it's just ticking along at 100 kind of thing, okay? I'd further suggest that when you get to Kununurra or Derby, whichever way on the Gibb River Road you are travelling, it would be a great idea just preemptively to change the oil and make sure that what goes in it is on spec, okay? I'd also keep the oil, I'd filter it, I'd look for any debris, and I'd keep a sample in a clean glass jar in case you have to get it analysed. Because if there is explosive indac poopy for this engine, I'd want a sample of that oil and I'd want the debris in it. I'd want to analyse that. And you'd have to go from there. It might be lawyers at 20 paces. I certainly hope not. But just keep a sample in a clean glass jar of both the debris, if any, and the ambient oil that comes out itself, okay? Get the whole car properly investigated, but on that, okay, this is a rattle on startup, some of which is just entirely normal, especially when you use thin oil. It's just because there's no oil pressure when you start an engine. And the oil pump needs to get oil from its level down here somewhere in the engine bay to the top of the valve train. And there's a whole bunch of places it has to go. And obviously, for a few seconds, they operate without optimal oil pressure while the system of galleries is pressurizing itself. So if it goes away after that, then it's probably less of a problem. Like, you don't want an easy to diagnose problem, right? Because if you open the bonnet and you see that fist-sized hole in the cylinder block and half a conrod sticking out of it, a monkey could diagnose that. ChatGPT could diagnose that. It's these niggling concern type issues with no fault codes, and they go away, and it could be normal or it could be sort of incipient catastrophe. That's hard to diagnose, especially if you're just listening to it and using your Jedi mind power, all right? Some rattle on startup is not abnormal. You've got to keep saying it to yourself, Richard. What else? I'd suggest that you assemble a jigsaw in your head based on available observations. And what you've got is what those Hollywood assholes would call a theory, but it's really just a hypothesis. That doesn't mean, no matter how neatly you assemble the jigsaw of observation into a coherent picture, it doesn't, and how neatly you do its hair and makeup and how much time you spend awake at night fantasizing about it in a bikini or out of a bikini. That doesn't mean that what you've assembled is reality. And you have to keep saying that to yourself, like, what if I'm wrong? What if it's something else? So it's like a null hypothesis is what they'd call it in science. But just with these problems, and everyone gets problems like this with vehicles from time to time. You think the servicing dude has let you down, or the engine's just behaving funnily, or it seems to shift funny and then you notice it all the time, or whatever. Could have been doing it all along. Could be nothing. Could be something. Who knows? But just don't assemble the picture and then lock yourself into it. Okay, you've got to distance yourself from your hypothesis and keep asking yourself, what if I'm wrong? But when you get back to quote-unquote civilization, to the extent that Kununurra or Derby could be categorised in that way, get someone hopefully with a bit of grey hair who looks like they know what they're doing and has been doing it for some time, without the bone through the nose, who doesn't know who Thrash, Deep Thrash or Snoop actually are. Like, get someone like that with runs on the board to just give it a once-over, because it's probably not their first rodeo, and they'll probably give you some valuable perspective on the jigsaw that you've been assembling for all of these days to weeks. And I hope it works out okay, Richard. And if you've been watching this video and made it to the end, thank you very much. If I missed something here, please let Richard know in the comments. I mean, I wouldn't be suggesting that timing chain and etc. would be the first sort of thing to suffer from cheap oil, from dodgy oil, whatever. I'd be suspecting bearings and things of that nature that actually rely on really tough, thin film protection to do their job over hundreds of thousands of cycles in just 5,000 Ks or something. I'd be expecting bearing wear from dodgy oil, and maybe the piston scrubbing, the cross-hatching on the cylinder bores. But I think the timing chain would most likely be fairly durable as long as it was at least wet. But if you've had your hands on the tools for a long time, particularly around Y62s and their predecessors, let us know in the comments. You'll be helping a dude just like you out, and it sounds to me like he needs it. Thank you very much for watching.